Hello, and welcome to the Ann Arbor District Library's AADL TV channel. I'm Amy Cantu, a librarian at AADL's archive, and I'd like to thank you for joining us for tonight's interview with former UMS presenter Ken Fischer, where we'll discuss his new book, Everybody In, Nobody Out. Until his retirement in 2017, Ken Fischer served for 30 years as president of the University of Michigan's University Musical Society, which in 2014 was awarded the National Medal of the Arts, the nation's highest public artistic honor. In 2019, Fischer was awarded an honorary doctorate of fine arts from the University of Michigan. His new book from the University of Michigan Press, Everybody In, Nobody Out, walks through the memorable events, decisions, initiatives, and people that he's met throughout his career. Welcome, Ken. It's great to see you again, and it's an honor to talk with you about your new book.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you, Amy.
So I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed that it was a little bit of history, but mostly of your period of history, some wonderful anecdotes, and actually some great lessons about leadership and some big ideas. And I wanted to talk to you about both of those things, some of the anecdotes and your big ideas. And one of the first ones is the title. And I know that this is a philosophy and a guiding philosophy for you as a presenter, and it came from a mentor. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, Everybody In, Nobody Out, it's not original with me. It was the inclusion policy of my mentor, Patrick Hayes, really the great impresario of Washington, D.C. A little background, what I think is the most important arts presentation of the 20th century was when Marian Anderson, in 1939 on Easter Sunday, performed in front of 75,000 people at the Lincoln Memorial. How did that happen? It's because she was denied the opportunity to perform at Constitution Hall because the Daughters of the American Revolution, who ran that hall, had in their bylaws the determination that no Black person would be giving a recital there. This so incensed the Roosevelts that Mrs. Roosevelt resigned from the DAR, and she and the president, Franklin Roosevelt, invited Marian Anderson to perform at the Lincoln Memorial. Now, watching this from New York City was a young man, Patrick Hayes, who was just being invited to come to Washington to manage the National Symphony. And from that early 40s till 1947, he formed the Patrick Hayes Concert Bureau and became the first person to present Marian Anderson in Constitution Hall after he and others were successful in helping to segregate the lunch counters and the theaters of Washington, D.C. So Patrick Hayes believed in equality and civil rights and that the arts should be for everyone. So in 1966, he established the Washington Performing Arts Society, chose as his first board chair Todd Duncan, the first Porgy and Bess, and a distinguished professor of voice at Howard University. And when you saw these two people together, you saw the Irish guy, Patrick Hayes, and then the tall Black man, Todd Duncan. This represented the future of the arts in Washington. And his inclusion policy for WPAS was everybody in, nobody out. And I was able to learn the business. I never worked for Patrick Hayes, but while I was in Washington, D.C., I got to know him, and he became my mentor. And I got infused with this notion of everybody in, nobody out. And that's what I brought with me to Ann Arbor in 1987 when I started to work here.
A little bit more about your time in D.C. I know that you went there. You had been a Vietnam War protester, and then you went to work for sort of the opposite side initially. Can you talk a little bit just about your background in DC?
Sure. Well, I think what got me to DC was the fact that I was a graduate student here in the study of higher education. And in 1970, as I'd finished all my coursework and my prelims, but getting tired of grad school, Kent State and Jackson State happened in 1970. These were when college students were shot to death by their peers in the National Guard and other authorities because they were protesting. And President Nixon said, we've got to form a commission and take a look at campus unrest. But that commission would start its business in June and end by the 1st of September. So I said, this is where I've got to be. I got to be in Washington working on this commission staff. And I just, an aside, I had no Republican credentials. I'd been a protester against the Vietnam War. I canvassed for Eugene McCarthy in the late 60s. How does a guy like me get a job on a presidential commission in a Republican administration? Well, I had a friend that I'd met at Interlochen, a fellow named Charlie McWhorter, who was a very strong Republican, moderate Republican, and a friend of the president. So I called Charlie. He said, "Come down, meet with me. What do you know about the subject?" Well, the fact is, I'd done a lot of interviewing and coding for doctoral programs of my fellow doctoral students. They were studying residential college and longitudinal study of Michigan students. So I sort of gained some research chops. And so Charlie McWhorter asked me, "Well, what do you know about the subject?" I gave him an hour Q&A about that. And he said, "I think you can qualify." He picked up the phone. "Bill, I've got a kid. I think he can help you out with the commission." He just called William Scranton, governor of Pennsylvania, just named the chair of the commission. And a few weeks later, I got a call. I was back in Ann Arbor at that time. I got a call from the White House. "Be here tomorrow. You got a job, and bring a suit." So I went down to Wagner's clothing store on South State Street, bought a suit. Thought I'd spend a couple of months. I spent 17 years in Washington after that.
And during that time, you had some fairly radical ideas about engaging people. You did some conference work, and you had some interesting ideas about how to get people engaged. And I'm curious because the notion of engagement is huge in your book and goes all the way through your Renegade series and all the different people that you brought together. So if you could talk just a little bit about that and how engagement was so important to you.
Exactly. So my first job in Washington was to organize conferences for members of the American Association for Higher Education. And I always felt participation was key. Then I got a job with the Institute for Educational Leadership to bring together public officials, researchers, and college presidents and deans around issues of public policy in higher education. But I felt, what we needed was to get people talking and engaging with each other. And so I began to test the conventional wisdom about meetings. Why have a keynote speaker if the knowledge is in the room? Why set up theater style when people want to talk to each other? So use round tables and do something at the beginning of the meeting to get people talking to each other and finding out who they are. And then I thought it was really important that every conference should have a Facebook. And now remember, this is 1979. It's before really anybody was using a computer. And the idea was, when you come to a conference, have somebody take a Polaroid shot of you and then have you fill out a form, post it on the wall. Because, most meetings are 3-day meetings. You spend the first day and a half trying to figure out where you belong. This way you could go and find out, what 5 things people could contribute to a meeting and what 5 things they want to gain. And what else would they like to do? Do you want to play poker? You want to do all of this was arrayed on a board. The problem was I wrote a book at that time, a very thin book called Little Big Winners, 77 Ideas for a Better Conference. Idea 27 was every conference should have a Facebook, but I didn't trademark it. I wasn't smart enough back then.
Too bad.
So yeah, engagement. And so people liked coming to the conferences that I did. So I was employed by 2 organizations from 1970 to 1978. Then I went into business for myself, designing and designing meetings for lots of different organizations, arts organizations, universities, corporations, where they valued participation, because that's a thing I was able to bring and to design ways for that to happen. For example, I helped design 17 plays for conference. Instead of having a keynote speaker, I'd get members of the organization to imagine, where were we 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 3 days after the conference, and 5 days out, and 10 days out. And you do this with a dramatic presentation on the stage. And I was the guy to create these different scenes. But I got there early enough, a day before, and I'd already recruited the cast, that they would be the ones to create the sequence of dialogue in each of these acts. So it became a very creative process for them. But then I could cross cast. In this one play, I had the chairman of the board as the janitor of the college. And I had the custodian as one of the members of the faculty. And if you don't think that was fun, it was great. And so people kind of enjoyed coming to the meetings that I did. But then in 1983, I had this consulting business going. I wanted to hear this group called the King Singers from England. And that's when I said, putting on a concert isn't that much different than putting on a conference. I can use the principles, and maybe I should do that. So from 1983 to 1987, I rented the Kennedy Center Concert Hall, put on musical performances. I put on a play about Albert Einstein. So I was getting my chops for being a presenter, but I put up my own money. It was a big risk, but I had more hits than misses. But that's where I was kind of learning the business, and that's how I met Patrick Hayes too.
Yeah. So one of my favorite stories in the book, you have some great stories, but my favorite, I think, is that Kennedy's the King Singers concert, the first one. I mean, it was a nail biter right down to the last minute. Can you just talk a little bit about that, because that was really fun?
Well, it's a long story, so I'll try to shorten it.
Sure.
So my brother Jerry and his wife Kathy were in England with Ford Motor Company, and in the late 70s, early 80s. They discovered the King Singers, 6 guys who in 1968, all as choral scholars at King's College, formed this group, men's a cappella group. And, these guys were trained in the English boy choir tradition. They can sing anything, and they know how to project. So you can put them on a 2,000 seats, the stage of a 2,000 seat auditorium, and they can be heard unamplified. Well, these guys were terrific. Penny and I, my wife Penny, we fell in love with them too. My brother presented them here in Detroit one year, and it was in the middle of a recession in Detroit in the early 80s. And I said, man, if Jerry can do that in a recession-ridden Detroit, imagine what I could do in Washington with a huge choral component. And Washington never has a recession. I mean, it's the seat of government. And so I took the idea to the various major presenters, and none of them was interested. So I figured, well, I'm going to go rent the hall and put on a show. Well, how I got the hall was a story in itself. But let's just put it this way. I was doing all of this by myself at that point, but I put out the word to 17 nonprofit organizations, because what I needed was a partner. And a group called the Alexandria Harmonizers, a group of 170 polyester-suited guys from the Washington area, became my partners. And these guys knew how to sell tickets. They sold out all of their own events over 3 days. They were the number 2 barbershop and chorus in the world at the time, wanted to be number 1. So we joined forces, and I took 100% of the financial risk. I told these guys, join with me. You won't make money until 1,800 tickets are sold of the 2,800. But anything between 1,800 and 2,800, you'll get 100% of the ticket price. And so a couple of things happened. We had the concert was going to be on Valentine's Day, 1983. 4 days before, we got a 20-inch snowfall in Washington, D.C. Washington doesn't know how to handle 1 inch of snow, much less 20. It closed the town. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, it was shut down, including the Kennedy Center. The Kennedy Center was closed. But fortunately, on the Monday of the 14th, Washington started to open up. The Kennedy Center opened. The schools were still closed. Government was on what they call liberal leave, which meant if you didn't feel like going in, you didn't have to. So what's happened? The King Singers fly in from Minneapolis. They're on the stage, 3:45, Kennedy Center, doing a warm-up, and the power goes out at the Kennedy Center. The power goes out. It's shut down. I asked the guy running the hall, has this ever happened before? He said, yeah, Ken, in the first year of the Kennedy Center, it went out for 2 days. I said, oh my gosh, the concert's at 8:30. And so we had a meeting of all the presenters in the theater that night at 6:15, and every one of them decided to cancel. And they all looked at me and said, what are you going to do, pal? And I said, look, your concerts are at 7:30 and 8. Mine's at 8:30. I want another half hour. If it's not, if the electricity isn't on by 6:45, I will cancel my concert. At 6:41, the power came on.
It's crazy.
And so I was, and then I put somebody at it. We had the Alexander Harmonizer members. We put one at every door, and as people would come in for the film or the play, we'd say, well, I'm so sorry, your event has been canceled. But do you really want to go out into 20 inches of snow when you can get a refund there and buy a ticket to the one thing going on in Washington tonight? 2,200 people showed up. Every critic, because there's nothing else going on, every critic that was there used the word perfect to describe the performance in one of, perfection, near perfection, perfectly executed. I couldn't believe it. That was my first gig as a professional presenter. And it just went on from there. I did 13 events between 1983 and 87. But that it's a longer story.
Yeah. It was just so many interesting things that you must have felt like you could do anything after that. So then you come to Ann Arbor. So in 1987, you come to Ann Arbor. And I know that one of the big things that you were faced with the May Festival was losing money, and you were dealing with, a whole different image from your predecessor, and you wanted to combat the sense of elitism and the sort of ivory tower approach that UMS had up to that point. So if you could talk a little bit about how you went about initially trying to change that and getting the people on board to work with you that you brought on board.
Well, there's a lot packed into that question, but let me say a few things. One, I arrived here June 1st, 1987. And if any of you know, the home of UMS is Burton Memorial Tower. It's a bell tower, but I also got a sense of it being somewhat of an ivory tower. And so when I arrived, certainly I give enormous credit to those who preceded me, especially Gail Rector and Charles Sink. Those were my immediate predecessors. Each was in the job of president for 30 years. But Charlie Sink actually began in 1904 as the business manager. So when you look, the three most current leaders before Matthew Van Biesen came on board had a combined, 113 years. I guess something like that. Anyway, it was a long time.
Right.
So a lot of credit to them because they had established us as a fantastic classical music presenter, bringing in the Vienna Philharmonic, Horowitz. 15 times Horowitz played on the stage of Horowitz, 15 times. And so we had established ourselves as a great classical music presenter. But as I looked, I saw that we had no really genuine relationship with these communities of shared heritage in our region. The largest concentration of Arabs outside the Middle East was, 30 miles away. Detroit, being a predominantly Black community, we really didn't have much of a relationship with the Black community. Then there was the diversity of Asian populations, all with very rich cultures. Then you think of the Americas, Canada to the north, but especially, Mexico, Central America, South America, all communities of significant population in our area, all with significant cultural expressions, but we really had no relationship with them. And if you're in the business of culture, you need to have these relationships within the community. So I thought one of the things we need to do, get out of the tower and into the communities of shared heritage. But at the same time, we didn't have much of a relationship with the other arts organizations in Ann Arbor itself, the Michigan Theater, the Ann Arbor Symphony. And I got a sense that one of the reasons we didn't was that, well, we had a very high opinion of ourselves. And, we present the Vienna Philharmonic and the Berlin Philharmonic. Do we really need a relationship with the Ann Arbor Symphony? Well, if you've grown up at the feet of Patrick Hayes, you're about everybody in, nobody out. I didn't think the Vienna Philharmonic would think any less of us if we had a good relationship with the Ann Arbor Symphony or the Michigan Theater. But then we had really no relationship with education. And I'm married to a professional musician who is an educator, there's something called pillow talk. So we arrive in Ann Arbor and I find Penny saying, "Hey, Fish, what are you going to do for the next generation? What about education?" So we needed to work on that. Then there were all these nonprofit organizations that that I wanted to get to know too, that were doing important contributions to the community. It might be health. We just needed to build those relations. Then there were all the local businesses that we could be working with. And so get out of the tower and into the communities of Southeast Michigan. So, but one of the things I needed to do was help move aboard from the notion of go it alone, which is kind of how we'd been behaving, to working together with others. And I came across 4 principles of partnership that I thought we should adopt. And those 4 principles are communication and cooperation. Those are natural. You got to do that if you're going to partner. But then there are 2 more nuanced ones called vulnerability and reciprocity. Vulnerability means that you approach your prospective partner with humility, with curiosity, listening, learning. And when you've been around for 110 years, which is where we had been at the time I joined, and you had no relationship with a number of these groups, you don't go in by saying, "Hi, I'm from the Musical Society. How can I help you?" Which had been a way often perceived by others in the community as the way the University of Michigan would often work. And I didn't want a part of any of that. Then that 4th one, reciprocity, you want to be sure that your partner is gaining as much or more than you are when you're building these relationships. And so there was some work to do with the board of directors of UMS to have them come to understand that working together with others, collaboration, was going to be the way of the future. And that took a little while, but things came around, and boy, did we have a great ride in building so many of these wonderful partnerships with those various groups that I had mentioned.
Yeah. So what do you do to, what's the secret to secure funding from wealthy, perhaps conservative donors for more radical, more ambitious programming that maybe is bringing in works by underrepresented groups that might challenge, some of those views? How do you bring those 2 groups together and bring them into one place? What's the secret?
Well, I think, there's evolution. You first have to get them to feel that there's something in it for them. So let's take a look at the way in which UMS worked our corporate sponsorships. Okay, you have to start someplace, and I'll just give the example of my first corporate call, which was to Great Lakes Bank Corps in the late '80s, and my brother was a banker at the time, working. He was the chief financial officer of what is now U.S. Bank. I called my brother, "Hey, Jerry, I'm going to go visit a banker. What do I do?" He said, "First of all, little brother, you want to shut up. You're going to go down there. You're going to sell. You don't want to sell. You want to engage the banker. Have him talk about talk about his bank." And so that's what I did. Mr. Weber, the chairman of Great Lakes Bancorp, was very proud to tell me that his was the only locally owned and locally headquartered bank in Ann Arbor at that time. Ding, ding, ding. Old. Ding, ding, ding. Then I asked him, well, what are the organizations you support? Well, the Michigan Theater, ding, 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 ding. The University of Michigan, ding, ding, ding. What this guy is giving me is all kinds of information. I'm listening, I'm learning. Then when he asks, what can I do for you? Well, Mr. Weber, let me tell you, the University Musical Society is old. We've been around even longer than your bank. The oldest thing we do is called Handel's Messiah. Handel's Messiah. It's been around since 1879. And guess what this year, Mr. Weber? The Ann Arbor Symphony is going to be the accompanying orchestra for us, a group that you already support. And all the soloists will be from the University of Michigan. And so, Mr. Weber, I'd like to invite you to be the sponsor of our Messiah this year. And for $10,000, it can be yours. But let me tell you, Mr. Weber, that $10,000 stays with us only a short time, because we're going to be passing it on to the Ann Arbor Symphony. And the Ann Arbor Symphony, you know what they're going to do with it? They're going to use it to pay the members of the orchestra that are accompanying our Messiah. And Mr. Weber, you know what those individuals are going to do with it? Put it back in your bank, Mr. Weber. Put it back in your bank. Well, I wouldn't have thought of that had my brother not said, listen, get clues from the person you're talking to. And Mr. Weber wrote a check for $10,000. And so the key here is we've never gone to a company and said, give us money. It's always been, tell us what your interests are. How can we work together? How can we work together to achieve our mutual benefits? And so I think that's been part of the success with corporations. It's also the way you deal with individuals. What are you interested in? So on and so forth. And so I think this is a really important point, because you've asked for how do we get people to sponsor these really challenging things that we did, throughout our career. First of all, you want to get them involved early on. And so what was really important to us was, because people would often say, I'm not going to that event, I don't know the artist. We were trying to get them to say, I've got to go to that event because I don't know the artist, and move them towards trusting UMS's artistic judgment where they don't want to miss it, okay? Well, when you get that kind of view that the audience starts to have, I can't miss it, I got to be there. Well, then it's easier to go to a donor and say, we've got an audience that's ready for this, and you build up sort of their tolerance for the unknown or the unfamiliar or that new venue, and I think that's where we had success. Another thing we did was build a relationship with the economic development organization here in Ann Arbor Spark, that's seeking to bring new businesses here. And then we also build a relationship with our friends from Spark, with the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. And both Spark, with Spark's help, MEDC provided significant support for 4 of our events between 2006 and 2013, significant dollars, because they saw the role of the arts in stimulating economic development. And in fact, one example in 2006, working with Spark and Tech Transfer and MEDC, we brought 10 corporate locators, people that are looking to locate or relocate a business. 2 businesses chose to locate in Ann Arbor after having experienced the Royal Shakespeare Company and Michigan football, and being hosted by local businesses here. And Crane's Magazine, Mary Kramer, MEDC hit a home run with its investment in Shakespeare. Okay, right. Well, then you get entrepreneurs, individual entrepreneurs, seeing the value of, they're all about risk. Okay, can you help us with this more risky um, type of performance? We're on board. We're there to help you because they see the importance of taking risk and that you're not always going to win.
Sure.
So I think that was an evolution. Get them involved first, and then you can stretch them a bit.
So the other side of the same coin is trying to get new audiences to come, different groups that typically wouldn't come to a UMS concert. So I wondered if you could tell us the story of how you handled the Ali Khan, because that's a great story too.
Well, first understand, I was so lucky shortly after I arrived here to find 3 people, just exceptional, all of whom were with me when I retired in 2017. Michael Konjoka, Director of Programming, Sarah Billman, Director of Marketing and Communications, and John Kennard, Director of Finance and Administration. 87, 88, 89, they joined. Together, we had 114 years, I think. But Michael Konjoka, his job as the programming director, helped us think about what we should be doing. He brought in a recording of Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, a Sufi devotional singer, to the management team meeting one day. And this is music we had never heard. It was unusual to us. Michael said, let me tell you, for his community, the Indo-Pakistani community, this guy he's like the Horowitz of that community. I can assure you, we present him, we're going to have that community entirely with us and behind us. It'll be the first event to sell out. I guarantee it. And indeed it was. This was in 1990, mid-90s. And the key here was finding a member of that community that we could work with who could help teach us about the traditions or the culture of that community. And it was a gentleman named Sardar Ansari. And he helped get the word out to his community. And we stayed in close touch with him. And when it came to learning the traditions, he would help instruct us. For example, he said, you folks know that when it turns 8 o'clock at Rackham Auditorium, my folks won't be in those 700 seats or 600 seats that they will have purchased, because this is a big deal for them. They're going to come in when they feel like it. They're going to be dressed up. Just know it's our tradition, for a concert of this magnitude for our people. Understand that. When it comes to food, just use my cousin Abdul. He'll take care of them. He'll take care of this special diet. But the critical thing was, he said, oh, yeah, you're going to have that fellow in the lobby with the $500 $1 bills, right? We said, well, tell us about that. Well, Ken, I understand. My people will reach a level of spiritual ecstasy as they listen to Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan and his group. And it is our tradition to dance towards the stage and place money. That's a sign of admiration and respect. So you want to be sure that there's a guy in the lobby with change as these people bring in their 10s and 20s. Imagine had we not had that level of community engagement, that wouldn't have turned out the same way. But fortunately, when we worked with the Arab community, we had Ismail Ahmed and this wonderful group of Arab women in Ann Arbor to work with. When we worked with the Latin community, we had Martina Guzman. We worked with the Chinese community, Wei Shen. We had these kind of community consultants to help us not make mistakes and be better informed and be more welcoming. We also worked with the Delta Sigma Theta and Lynx Inc. These are 2 Black organizations. Women, one is a women's sorority, another a women's service organization. And working with them, they would invite members of their community, many of whom had never been to a concert, never been to Hill Auditorium, and welcomed them. And then the very simple idea, let's put people at the door when a concert is beginning who look like them. and welcome them to Hill Auditorium. And it's interesting, I learned from my good friend Letitia Bird and Willis Patterson that Hill Auditorium had not always been a welcoming place to everybody in the community. And how do you change that? Well, you change it by having it be more welcoming. And like you do at church, somebody's there to say, hi, it's great to see you.
Right.
Well, why not have people who look like those you want to have be welcomed, welcoming them? And we did that for a year. And then after that, we didn't really have to do it. People's perception of UMS was changing, everybody in, nobody out.
Another group that you took care of were the students. I remember reading about all the efforts that you made to be inclusive and to bring students on board. And that reminded me of the story with Leonard Bernstein. Could you talk a little bit about that story?
Well, folks should know that Bernstein, well before me, he loved coming to Ann Arbor. He came with the New York Philharmonic. He came with the Vienna Philharmonic. And this, of course, one of the great conductors, one of the great composers, pianists, musical theater, and symphonic composers of the 20th century. And my first two concerts here at Hill Auditorium, back-to-back performances of Leonard Bernstein and the Vienna Philharmonic, totally intimidating for me. But my job after the second concert was to go into that dressing room and talk to Bernstein about coming back the following year, because he knew and I knew that there would be a small North American tour to celebrate his 70th birthday, and that cities all over the North America were bidding on it. So I needed to put in a word for UMS. Now remember, this is my second concert in my career at Hill Auditorium. I'm totally intimidated by this guy. I brought Patrick Hayes and his wife out to that concert, hoping he would hold my hand. So I said, hey, Patrick, won't you come into the dressing room with me? And while I talk to Ken, you can handle it, just do it. I'm a tall guy. Bernstein is short, even shorter as he's sitting in the chair in the dressing room. So I get down on my right knee and I look him in the eye and I say, Mr. Bernstein, we want to have you back next year, or something feeble like that. He said, Ken, these are his exact words. Ken, I love this town. I love the people of this town, and I love this hall. We'll be back. And sure enough, 4 cities were chosen for that October 1988 tour: Ann Arbor, Toronto, Washington, and New York. And that became an historic concert. Now to get to your point, Bernstein is an educator too. He loves students, but he also loves to party after a concert.
Right.
And so we decided, tickets were going for $125 to a whole lot of people, but we said for students, $10, and we'll put them on sale about a week before the concert. Students lined up 14 hours in advance. And we had a brand new president coming in on October 1st, Jim Duderstadt and his wife, Ann. I went to them and I said, Jim and Ann, your first social event in your home could be hosting Bernstein after the concert on the 29th. And I can tell you, every major donor for the University of Michigan will want to be there. I mean, it's a tremendous opportunity for you. And bless their hearts, Jim and Ann came back the next day and said, Ken, we like your idea, but what if the guests were 30 students doing now what Bernstein might have been doing when he was their age, young composers and conductors and pianists? Was that brilliant? I said, Jim, if I can just modify that, have 20 of those kids be selected by Paul Boylan at the School of Music who meet that criteria. But I'd love to invite the first 10 kids in line, those kids that are going to stay out all night to buy tickets to the concert. And so Jim and Ann invited these 30 students. Imagine you're a student at the University of Michigan and you're being invited by the president. I wanted to be sure that they went backstage, so they all went backstage first to meet him. Then they went over to the president's house because it was going to be a long time till Bernstein would get there, because this is a guy who would want to meet every single person that stood in line after the concert. I've never seen him shut that line down. That line might be 2 hours long, but Bernstein would be there. And And the people hosting the post-concert event needed to know he might not show up till midnight, which was the case here. And how did we get Bernstein to say yes to going to the event? As these kids were lined up, my staff and I came at 6 a.m. So we had 3 hours between 6 o'clock on that Saturday till the box office would open at 9 o'clock. And we put two clipboards together. We had 8.5 by 11 blank sheets and a piece of tape that said, send a message to Lenny. Well, these creative University of Michigan students wrote these fantastic messages to Leonard Bernstein. Hey, Mr. Bernstein, my mom and dad fell in love listening to West Side Story. I'm the product. If I'm not in this line, my ass is grass. Eddie, class of 91. Mr. Bernstein, you've written concertos for everybody else. How about me? Eddie, bassoon major at university. We had 100 of these notes, lots of photos, sent them off to Bernstein and his party. And a few days later, and along with the letter, Mr. Bernstein, this is the next generation of your fans. They'd love to meet you at the president's house. Say yes. Of course, he said yes. And then Bernstein held court with these kids at the president's house from midnight to 1:30. And at 1:30 in the morning, I went over to him and I said, hey, the president and his wife they're kind of fading in the corner. I think it might be time to go. To which he said, I don't think so. And he went to the piano at 1:30 in the morning in the president's home, started playing tunes from Candide and West Side Story. And then 10 minutes later, he said, okay, Ken, where's that place you said we could go? And I said, the Full Moon Bar downtown. Bernstein piled a bunch of those kids in his limo. Others found other ways to get there. And he held court till 4:30 in the morning with those kids. Now imagine what that meant to those 30 University of Michigan students, one of whom, the first person in line, a freshman named Jennifer Dowderman, is now in Berlin. She founded an international organization called Classical Next. We become friends. And she said that night certainly had influence on me with what I'm doing now, advancing classical music with the younger generation. It's amazing.
Reading about the way you helped connect people that's some of my favorite content in the book, whether it's hooking up Baryshnikov with a golfing partner or, Cecilia Bartoli with the Dascola brother barbers. Those are just great stories. Between that and your overall commitment to bringing your life lessons in leadership and working with others and bridging those gaps, it was quite a read. I do want to ask just a couple more questions. I think I would be remiss not to at least acknowledge that, what we're going through right now with the pandemic is taking such a toll on the arts. Arts organizations are going to struggle. They're struggling now, and they're going to continue to struggle for a while. You came in 1987 and you had some financial difficulties. And I know you talk in your book a little bit about the trouble after the 2008 recession, but do you feel that UMS is, after all that it's been through, is poised to recover from the situation we're in right now pretty well?
Well, first of all, I want to acknowledge we've never seen anything like this. I mean, we had a bump, after 9/11, we had a bump with the recession of 2008, but nothing like this. But I am so pleased with my successor, Matthew Van Biesen, who came to us after 5 years with the New York Philharmonic, where he was president there. And I'm so proud of him and his team with the way they've taken another mantra at the Musical Society: where there's crisis, there's opportunity. Where there's crisis, there's opportunity. And I think those of us in the arts, we're always looking for the silver lining. How can we take advantage of this challenging opportunity to do something different and creative? And if you look at what UMS is doing right now, it's online stuff, but they're building significant relationships with outstanding artists. The Paul Taylor Dance Company has done now a whole week of virtual programs. Joyce DiDonato, one of the great sopranos of our time, she's now, a major partner with UMS in doing programming. And most recently, she did an interview with, with the producer of Hamilton, Jeffrey Seller. A kid grew up in Oak Park, Michigan, went to the University of Michigan, and we know how brilliant Hamilton is. He was one of the people that she interviewed, but she also interviewed two students who are called Pole Heroes. These are the kids that the 30,000 of them, I think, around the country, who took the place of older, the experienced poll workers who just couldn't this year because of COVID. Then she ended her session by singing "This Land Is Your Land." The Guthrie tune with some new words that are critical to our time. Then there are other resonancies being created. Matthew is keeping in touch with the patrons. Surely they're going to take a hit this year. There may need to be, changes in personnel. You just don't have the live experience right now. But I think UMS and so many of the other organizations are finding ways to keep the audience engaged. The King Singers, we talked about them. I now am president of the King Singers Global Foundation. And these guys have set up a digital concert tour. They charge, I think it's €9.90, £9.90, or $9.90. And they have a relationship with a group called Idagio. And these are first-rate productions. You happen to watch them, on your TV or on your smartphone. But you also have, in addition, they're talking to the audience. They're talking about the pieces. We're seeing, we get an inside view of the artists. We're going backstage. We're having the kind of experiences with artists that we don't typically have in a live performance. But with a digital communication right now, we can have that experience. It's not like going to a live concert, which has its special attributes. But boy, they're pivoting in a creative way. And UMS, fortunately, we're 142 years old. We've been around for a long time. We have a phenomenal audience, an audience that's praised by the visiting artists. And they're there and they support UMS. And I'm sure that they always will. We have a great partner in the University of Michigan as well. We were able to get, UMS was able to get through the 2019-20 season pretty well because of the generosity of people returning tickets, right, for those events that had to be canceled in late March and in April. It's not clear how things are going to go this year, but I just know UMS is doing everything it can to keep the arts alive for its patrons and for the community. Doing the same with education. I don't know those details as well, but I know we're still providing opportunity for young people as much as we can without being, live.
Right. I have one final question for you. A sort of two-part. When you look back over your 30 years as a UMS presenter, what are you most proud of? And was there a fish that got away?
Well, there's so much to be proud of. I think that we were the first university-related presenter to be presented with the National Medal of Arts was really touching, but it was an institutional award. It reflected 100, and at that time I think it was 37 years of excellence. And that's a reflection on all those who preceded me, to the great staff and board and patrons that we have. So it was an award that grasped everybody in this area, everybody that had been involved with UMS previously. So I'm really proud of that. I'm so proud of the people, the staff, colleagues that I've had, many of whom have now gone on to be leaders in the field in other organizations, that we were able to help give them a start, and they're now doing great things. I'm proud of how we evolved to become a more interesting, diverse, inclusive organization that recognize the rich cultural expressions of the communities in our region. I'm glad we got in better shape financially. I mean, we were kind of hurting coming in, but we're in good shape now. And then, there's one concert I'll never forget. I mean, people say, what's your greatest memory? It's the concert when Cecilia Bartoli had to cancel, and how we pivoted in a couple of days, brought in a relatively unknown artist to succeed her, who just knocked it out of the park.
Ava
Podlesh was her name.
She was amazing.
And I trusted Michael Konjoka's judgment that, Ken, yes, it's okay if we bring an artist that nobody's heard of, even you, because she deserves it. She's got a 4.5 octave range. She's been stuck in Central Europe. People need to hear her. We can help reboot that career. And the story's in the book, but she gave a spectacular concert here, and she was forever grateful to us. I think in a year or so later, she had 2 debuts in New York. I think one at Carnegie Hall and one, in the Great Performance Series at Lincoln Center. And she's always thanked us for taking that risk. And I must say, it reflected really well on our audience, because 4,200 people were going to attend what would have been Cecilia Bartoli. It would have been the highest grossing regular season concert in our history with Cecilia Bartoli. She had to cancel. Ava came in, 3,600 people showed up. We actually netted more money on that concert because Cecilia canceled, because the difference in their fee was greater than what we had to refund. Cecilia felt so badly that she said, "Can I open your next season?" Where there's crisis, there's opportunity. And but our staff, we called every single ticket purchaser from Friday morning till Saturday noon. This concert was Saturday night after she canceled the day, and on Thursday. It was our finest hour. That staff getting on the phone and calling people, and then our audience responding. Yeah, I don't know this woman. What's her name? Ava Podlesh, but I'm going to be there. I'll be there to support you guys. So I'm grateful for all of that. Was there a second part to your question?
Yeah. Was there a fish that got away?
Wow. Well, I can't say that Cecilia got away, but her last performance here was in 2004. I would love to have had her back, but she doesn't like to fly, so we were never able to have her return. I would love to have had her back in our last season. When it comes to artists, I think we were able to get most every artist we want. Just a quick story. So the mother of all performing arts presenters, is Carnegie Hall. When it's music, that's the mother load, So on the 100th anniversary of Carnegie Hall, which was May 15th, 1991, May 5, 1991. I, of course, went that day. I thought I had to be there. What was interesting is that the artists that performed on that concert, now it's their 100th anniversary, they can get anybody that they want. What I found interesting was that every artist that appeared that day at Carnegie Hall, we had either presented the year before, that year, or the next year in Ann Arbor, except for one. And so it's hard for me to think what got away, but I'd rather turn it around. Who were we able to get in our little town of Ann Arbor? And I think, that's pretty good. If Carnegie deemed these were the artists that it want for its 100th anniversary, that we had presented that same group of artists over a 3-year period, except for one, and that ain't bad.
No, that's amazing.
I'd have to think hard about, when you were able to bring in the Royal Shakespeare Company, Wynton 19 times, Yo-Yo almost any time we wanted him, Berlin, Vienna, and Amy, the audience here is so special. And if I can just end by, because I want people to feel proud of themselves because of the impact they have on our visiting artists. So it's 1999. Berlin had just been here the night before. I get an email the next day from the president of the orchestra named Peter Riegelbauer. He's a string bass player, and it's a self-governing orchestra. So he's like the cheese, but he's a string bass player. He sends me an email and said, and then in subsequent conversations, he came up with 5 things. Why do we like, and these are the things special about Ann Arbor. Number 1, you're the smallest town, but you deliver the largest crowd in that magnificent hall called Hill Auditorium. You pack it, and the acoustics are great, but you're a small town, and it's amazing. Number 2, you let us play what we want to play. That night, you let us play Schoenberg's Pelleas and Melisande. Other cities are afraid of Schoenberg. But not only were you not afraid, your audience stood and cheered when it was over, having never heard the piece before on that stage. Number 3, we looked out in the audience and we saw students everywhere. We don't see that at other places. And number 4, the hospitality that you show us, we don't get in other cities. And it begins with that letter in German on the bed of every single orchestra member at the campus inn in German on behalf of the community. And then you toss in the Zingerman's coupon and then the opportunity to get into the health club free. Those are great things. And 5, you knew what to do with our ill conductor, Claudio Abbado. So he said 2 things. Number 1, what would you think if 18 of us from the orchestra came and spent 2 weeks playing chamber music, much of it with your students? I mean, this is the Vienna Philharmonic. Now, we couldn't invite them when they wanted to come because it was right in the middle of the Royal Shakespeare Company residency of 2001. That's the one time they could come was in March. And I said, we can't do it then. But we did have a smaller group, the Sharoon Ensemble, come a few years later and spend a few days here. But the other thing he said, Ken, I want to remind you of the cities on the tour. This is the 1999 North American tour. Moscow, Bonn, Paris, London, New York, Washington, Chicago, Boston, and Ann Arbor. And yours is the city we want to come back to. And then a little denouement of that. That was 1999. So it's 2016. The Berlin is back. It's my final year. I'm at the airport, Willow Run, picking up the charter flight. And Sir Simon Rattle, the conductor, rides back with me. It's just the 2 of us in the Diva Mobile, our Lincoln MKZ. And I say to him, Sir Simon, I just want you to know how much it means to us that this orchestra is able to come back. And he starts to chuckle. He says, Ken, I don't know if you're aware of this, but when I arrived with this orchestra to be its conductor, we were planning our next North American tour. The orchestra made it very clear with me, we begin our planning of the North American tour with Ann Arbor as a given. So, and that has everything to do with the quality of our audience, the quality of our halls, the fact that they see students in the house. All these things combine to have these great musicians, actors, dancers feel special about Ann Arbor.
That's a great legacy. Thank you so much, Ken. It was great talking with you, and congratulations on your remarkable career and the new book.
Thanks a lot, Amy. Great being with you today.
The title of Ken's new book is Everybody In, Nobody Out, Inspiring Community at Michigan's University Musical Society. It's available in our library's catalog and for purchase online, at local bookstores, in hardback and Kindle, and through the University of Michigan Press website.